The morning sun reflected off the glass towers of Westbrook Industries like a warning. Emma Rodriguez adjusted her blazer as she walked through the marble lobby, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She had worked here for 6 years, climbing from junior analyst to senior financial strategist. And every single day felt like a performance. Smile at the right people. Laugh at jokes that weren't funny. Pretend the casual touches from certain executives were accidents. She stepped into the elevator, beside a man in worn coveralls carrying a toolbox. Tommy Hayes. She knew his name because she made it a point to know everyone, even the people others pretended didn't exist. He nodded at her respectfully and moved to the corner, making himself smaller in a space that was already too small for both of them. The doors closed and silence stretched between them. Emma glanced sideways and caught him staring at the buttons, not at her. In 6 years, she had never once seen him look at a woman the way Richard Sullivan did, like she was something to consume. Tommy just existed quietly, fixing things that broke, cleaning spaces others dirtied, visible to everyone who mattered. The elevator opened on the executive floor, and Emma stepped out. Tommy remained inside, heading higher to fix something on the roof. Their worlds separated again as they always did. Jonathan Westbrook stood in his corner office, staring down at the city below. 43 years old, 200 million in personal wealth, and absolutely nothing that felt real. He had built Westbrook Industries from a small consulting firm into a corporate empire. And somewhere along that climb, he had forgotten what it felt like to be human. His employees feared him. His board respected him. His ex-wife had left him 3 years ago, saying she couldn't find the man she married underneath all the money. He was right. That man was gone. His assistant knocked and entered. The morning executive meeting was starting. Jonathan made his way to the conference room, where 12 vice presidents and senior directors waited. All perfectly dressed, all perfectly fake. Richard Sullivan sat at the far end, laughing too loudly at his own joke. The man was everything wrong with corporate America, compressed into an expensive suit. The meeting dragged on for an hour. Profit margins. Expansion strategies. Layoff projections. Human beings reduced to numbers on spreadsheets. Jonathan barely listened until he heard Richard's voice cut through the room. I saw that maintenance guy again this morning. What's his name? Tony? Terry? Tommy Hayes, someone offered. Right, Tommy? You guys been here, 8 years? Still wearing the same ratty coveralls. You'd think he could afford new clothes by now. Richard laughed, and several others joined him. Some people are just meant to stay at the bottom, you know. It's like they're comfortable there. Emma sat 3 seats away and felt her jaw tighten. She said nothing because saying something meant making herself a target. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Jonathan felt something crack inside his chest. Not loudly. Just a small fracture that let something old and buried start seeping through. He thought about Tommy Hayes, a man he had seen 1,000 times and never really looked at. He thought about Richard Sullivan, a man he had promoted because he delivered results, even though he was poison. He thought about himself, sitting at the head of a table surrounded by people, who would smile while the world burned as long as their bonuses cleared. The crack widened. Meeting adjourned. Jonathan said suddenly. Everyone looked confused but stood to leave. Jonathan remained seated, his mind working through something reckless and necessary. Emma was the last to file out, and for just a moment their eyes met. She saw something in his expression she had never seen before. Something almost human. 3 hours later, Jonathan called an emergency all-staff meeting. The entire company, from executives to maintenance workers, crowded into the main auditorium. Rumors flew through the crowd, like wildfire. Layoffs, merger, bankruptcy. No one knew what to expect. Tommy Hayes stood in the back near the exits, still in his coveralls, still carrying his toolbox. He had been replacing ceiling tiles on the 4th floor when the announcement came through. He almost didn't attend, figuring whatever the boss had to say didn't apply to people like him. Jonathan walked onto the stage, without notes or presentation slides. The crowd quieted instantly. He looked out at hundreds of faces, most of them strangers despite working in the same building. His eyes found Richard Sullivan in the front row, then traveled back to where Tommy Hayes stood, trying to disappear into the wall. "I've been thinking about this company," Jonathan began, his voice amplified through the sound system, "about what we've built and what we've become. I've been thinking about power and who deserves it. And I've realized something important. The people at the top, including myself, have forgotten what it means to serve rather than rule." Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. "So I'm conducting an experiment. For one full business day, I'm handing over complete operational control of Westbrook Industries to someone else. Someone who represents everything this company has overlooked and undervalued." Nate paused. "Tommy Hayes, would you please come to the stage?" The auditorium erupted into shocked whispers. Tommy froze against the back wall, certain he had misheard. Emma turned in her seat, searching for his reaction. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and she saw genuine terror on his face. "Tommy Hayes," Jonathan repeated. "Come up here." Tommy moved through the crowd like a man walking to his execution. People parted for him, some with mocking smiles, others with genuine curiosity. Richard Sullivan's face had turned red with barely contained laughter. Emma watched Tommy climb the stairs to the stage, his toolbox still in his hand, his coveralls stained with paint and dust. Jonathan extended his hand, and Tommy shook it hesitantly. "Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. You will sit in my office with full authority to make any decision you see fit," Jonathan announced to the stunned crowd. "You can change policies, fire people, hire people, restructure departments, whatever you believe is right. For 24 hours, you are the CEO of Westbrook Industries." The room exploded with noise, laughter from some, gasps from others. Tommy just stood there looking like he wanted to disappear through the floor. "This is insane," Richard Sullivan shouted over the chaos. "This is a joke, right?" "No joke," Jonathan said calmly. "Tomorrow, we'll see what leadership actually looks like when it comes from someone who understands what it means to struggle." Ma felt something shift in her chest. She looked at Tommy on that stage, terrified and confused, still clutching his toolbox like a lifeline. And she felt the first spark of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Not attraction to power or wealth or status. Something far more dangerous. Attraction to character. Tommy finally found his voice. "Sir, I don't understand." "Why me?" Jonathan smiled sadly. "Because you're the only person in this building who doesn't want power. That's exactly why you should have it." The meeting ended in chaos, and Tommy disappeared as quickly as possible. Rushing back to the maintenance room in the basement, Emma returned to her desk, but couldn't focus on anything. Her mind kept returning to that moment on stage, to the look in Tommy's eyes, to the impossible thing that was about to happen. That evening, as she left the building, she saw Tommy in the parking lot climbing into a beat-up Honda Civic held together with duct tape and prayer. He sat there for several minutes, not starting the engine, just gripping the steering wheel like he was trying to anchor himself to reality. Emma walked to her own car, a sensible sedan that represented 6 years of careful financial planning. And she wondered what tomorrow would bring. She wondered if anyone was ready for what happened when you gave power to someone who had never wanted it. Tommy Hayes didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small apartment, staring at the single suit he owned, purchased 5 years ago for his mother's funeral. It still fit, barely, though the sleeves were a bit short and the fabric had faded from black to charcoal gray. He pressed it carefully, his hands shaking slightly, trying to understand what Jonathan Westbrook expected from him. This had to be humiliation. Some kind of elaborate corporate theater designed to prove a point he didn't understand. Rich people played games that poor people became pieces in. He had learned that lesson long ago, but something in Jonathan's eyes had looked genuine. Desperate even. At 7:30 the next morning, Tommy walked into Westbrook Industries wearing his funeral suit and carrying nothing but his dignity. The lobby receptionist did a double take, then quickly looked away. Whispers followed him to the elevator. He rode up to the executive floor alone, watching the numbers climb, feeling like he was ascending to his own execution. Jonathan's assistant, a polished woman named Patricia, greeted him with professional courtesy that barely masked her confusion. She led him into the corner office where Jonathan waited. The CEO stood by the window, and when he turned, Tommy saw something he hadn't expected. relief. "Thank you for coming," Jonathan said, gesturing to the massive desk. "It's yours for the day. Everything is already set up. You have access to all systems, all files, all personnel records. My assistant will help you navigate anything technical." Tommy stood frozen in the doorway. "I still don't understand why. 'Cause I need to see if there's another way to do this," Jonathan said quietly. "I need to know if power can exist without cruelty. And I think you might be the only person who can show me." Before Tommy could respond, Jonathan walked past him and out of the office, leaving him alone with more authority than he had ever imagined possessing. Tommy sat slowly in the leather chair. The desk was larger than his entire bedroom. The view stretched across the city to the horizon. He touched the computer mouse, and the screen illuminated, showing a schedule packed with meetings, decisions, and responsibilities he didn't understand. His first meeting was at 8:30. The executive team, Emma Rodriguez, arrived at her desk at 7:45 and immediately heard the gossip spreading through the office like a virus. Tommy Hayes was actually going through with it. He was sitting in Jonathan's office right now. Richard Sullivan was planning to make it a circus. Several executives had already placed bets on how quickly Tommy would crack or quit. She felt anger rise in her throat. These people turned everything into a game. Someone's dignity was just entertainment for them. At 8:25, Emma made a decision that surprised herself. She stood from her desk, straightened her blazer, and walked to the executive floor. She had no invitation to the meeting, but she had enough seniority that no one would question her presence. She wanted to witness this. She wanted to be there if Tommy needed an ally. The conference room filled quickly. 12 executives, all wearing expensive suits and expressions ranging from amusement to contempt. Richard Sullivan sat in his usual spot, grinning like a predator who had just spotted wounded prey. Emma took a seat near the back, trying to make herself invisible while remaining present at 8:30 exactly. Tommy Hayes walked into the room. The laughter started immediately. Not loud, but present. Little chuckles and smirks exchanged between people who had never known hunger or fear or desperation. Tommy stood at the head of the table, his old suit marking him as an outsider, his calloused hands resting on the back of Jonathan's chair. He didn't sit down. "Good morning," Tommy said quietly. His voice was steady, despite the mockery in the room. "I know this seems strange to all of you. It seems strange to me too. But I've been asked to lead for one day, so that's what I'm going to do." Richard Sullivan leaned back in his chair. "Well, this should be entertaining. Tell us, Tommy, what's your grand vision for the company? Should we all start wearing coveralls?" More laughter. Tommy let it wash over him without reacting. Emma watched his face and saw something remarkable. He wasn't intimidated. He was listening. Actually listening to the cruelty, cataloging it, understanding it. "I've worked here for 8 years," Tommy said. "I've been in every office, every floor, every corner of this building. I've heard conversations people don't think someone like me would understand. I've seen how decisions get made and who they hurt. So yes, I do have some thoughts." The laughter faded slightly. Tommy pulled out a folder. Inside were printouts, notes he had made during the night when sleep wouldn't come. "I want to start by discussing the janitorial staff reduction plan for next quarter." I pulled the files. "You're cutting 12 positions to save 2. $100,000 while executive bonuses this year total $18 million. Dropped over the room like a curtain. "Those 12 people have families," Tommy continued. "They have rent and medical bills and children who need school supplies. $200,000 is a rounding error in this company's budget. But it's the difference between survival and homelessness for them." Richard Sullivan's smile had vanished. "Those decisions are based on efficiency models and profitability projections. You wouldn't understand the complexity." "I understand that you're choosing yacht upgrades over people's lives," Tommy said flatly. "So here's my first decision. The layoffs are canceled. Instead, we're cutting executive bonuses by 3% across the board. That covers the cost and leaves money left over." The room erupted. Executives shouted over each other, their faces red with indignation. Richard Sullivan stood up, slamming his palm on the table. "You can't do that. Our bonuses are contractually guaranteed. Tommy finally sat down in Jonathan's chair. He looked small in it, but his voice remained steady. Your contracts include a clause allowing modification based on company performance and leadership discretion. I checked, and right now, I have that discretion. Emma felt her heart racing. She had never seen anyone stand up to these people like this. Tommy wasn't being aggressive or cruel. He was simply being honest. That honesty was more devastating than any insult could be. For the next 3 hours, Tommy worked through issue after issue. He questioned the policy that required employees to pay for their own parking while executives had reserved spaces. He challenged the performance review system that disproportionately punished lower-level workers. He examined vendor contracts and found a cleaning company being paid half the rate they charged other clients. Every decision he made came from a place of lived experience. He knew what it meant to choose between medication and groceries. He understood the weight of working 3 jobs just to afford a studio apartment. He had felt the shame of being invisible to people who walked past him every day, and he used that knowledge like a scalpel, cutting away the casual cruelties that rich people called business. By noon, half the executives had walked out in protest. Richard Sullivan had threatened to quit twice, but Tommy kept going, methodical and calm, making note of every objection, every excuse. Every moment when someone valued money over humanity, Emma hadn't moved from her seat. She watched Tommy work and felt something dangerous growing inside her chest. Not the shallow attraction she had felt for other men, based on charm or looks or status. This was deeper. This was recognition. She was watching someone be exactly who they were, without apology or performance. And it was the most attractive thing she had ever witnessed. During a brief break, Emma found herself alone in the corridor with Tommy. He was standing by the window, staring out at the city, looking exhausted. "You're doing something remarkable in there," she said quietly. Tommy turned, surprised to see her. He had noticed Emma before, of course. You couldn't work in a building for 8 years and not notice a woman like her, but he had never allowed himself to think about her in any real way. Women like Emma belonged to a different world. One where men wore suits that fit and drove cars that didn't break down every other month. "I'm probably getting fired tomorrow," he said with a tired smile. "Might as well make it count." "They're scared of you," Emma said, moving closer. "Richard Sullivan has spent the last hour in his office making phone calls. He's trying to build a coalition to override your decisions." "I figured." Tommy looked back out the window. "Doesn't matter. I'm not doing this to keep power. I'm doing this because someone should say these things out loud." Emma stood beside him, close enough that she could smell his cologne. It was cheap, something purchased at a drugstore, but it was clean and honest, like everything else about him. "Why are you really here, Tommy? You could have said no to Jonathan's offer." He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I have a daughter," he finally said. "She's 11. Lives with her mother in Ohio. I send them everything I can, but it's never enough. And I think about her growing up and maybe working for a place like this someday. I wonder what kind of world she's going to inherit. If today's the only chance I get to change something, even just a little, then I have to try." Emma felt something crack open inside her chest. She had spent 6 years building walls around herself, protecting against the Richards of the world, against men who saw her as a trophy or a conquest. But standing next to Tommy Hayes in his too small suit, talking about his daughter with quiet love in his voice, those walls felt like a prison she had built herself. "I think you're the bravest person I've ever met," she said softly. Tommy looked at her, and for the first time he allowed himself to really see her, not as someone unreachable, but as a woman standing beside him, choosing to be there. The air between them changed, becoming thick with possibility and danger and want. But Tommy stepped back. "I should get back to work. I only have a few more hours." Emma watched him walk away and felt something she hadn't felt in years. The ache of wanting something real. The afternoon brought Tommy's greatest challenge. Richard Sullivan requested a private meeting in the executive conference room. Tommy agreed, though every instinct told him it was a trap. Emma heard about the meeting through office gossip and positioned herself nearby, ready to intervene if needed. Tommy entered the conference room to find not just Richard, but 6 other senior executives. They sat arranged around the table like a tribunal. and Richard stood at the head wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tommy, we need to talk about reality," Richard began, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "You've had your fun today, made your little statements. Very inspiring. But let's be honest about what's happening here. Jonathan is having some kind of crisis, and he's using you to work through it. Tomorrow, everything goes back to normal." Tommy sat down calmly. "Probably true. So here's what we're proposing," Richard continued. "End this gracefully. Walk away now. We'll give you a severance package. $50,000. That's more money than you make in 2 years. Take it, disappear, and we'll pretend this whole circus never happened." Tommy looked at the faces around the table. These men had probably spent an hour crafting this offer, believing that money solved everything because it had always solved everything for them. They couldn't imagine someone saying no. "Let me tell you what that money means to me," Tommy said quietly. "It means I could pay off my daughter's medical debt from when she had pneumonia last year. It means I could maybe afford to visit her more than twice a year. It means I could fix my car instead of praying it starts every morning." He paused. "It means a lot." Richard's smile widened. "So we have a deal?" "No," Tommy said. "Because that money is you buying my silence about everything I've seen today. You're asking me to take a bribe and pretend I don't know how this company treats people? And I can't do that. Not even for $50,000. The room went cold. Richard's smile disappeared entirely. "You're making a serious mistake." Maybe Tommy agreed. "But it's my mistake to make." "Fine." Richard's voice turned hard. "Then let me make this simple. There's a situation that requires immediate attention. A vendor contract that's up for renewal. The company is trying to decide between 2 options. Option 1 costs more, but keeps 100 warehouse workers employed. Option 2 saves money, but those jobs go overseas. You have to make the call right now." Tommy felt the trap closing. "Why does it have to be decided today?" "Because that's business, Tommy. Real leadership means making hard choices quickly." "So what's it going to be? Are you willing to cost this company money to save jobs? Or are you going to make the smart business decision?" Emma listened from outside the door, her hands clenched into fists. This was exactly the kind of false dilemma that executives use to justify cruelty. Force someone to choose between 2 bad options and pretend there's no third way. Tommy stood up. "I need to see the actual contract and the financial breakdown. I'm not making a decision based on your summary." "There's no time," Richard snapped. "Then we'll make time." Tommy walked to the door and opened it, finding Emma standing there. Their eyes met, and understanding passed between them without words. "Emma, I need your help. Can you pull the financial records for the vendor contracts Richard is talking about?" Emma nodded. "I'll have them in 10 minutes." For the next hour, Tommy and Emma worked side by side in Jonathan's office, going through spreadsheets and contract details. Tommy asked questions and Emma translated corporate language into plain truth. They sat close together, shoulders almost touching. Their professional collaboration charged with an undercurrent of attraction neither acknowledged aloud. "This doesn't make sense," Tommy said, pointing at a line item. "The overseas option isn't actually cheaper. They're hiding the transition costs and quality control expenses." Emma leaned in, her hair brushing his shoulder. "You're right. When you factor in everything, keeping the warehouse open is actually the better financial decision long term. Richard is lying about the numbers." Tommy looked at her. "Why would he do that?" "Because he has a personal stake in the overseas company. It's buried in the disclosure forms, but it's there. He profits if we switch vendors." Her faces were inches apart. Emma could see the exhaustion in Tommy's eyes, but also the determination. She could smell his cheap cologne and see the frayed edge of his collar, and none of it mattered. All that mattered was the man underneath, the one who refused to compromise his principles even when it would have been easier. "Thank you," Tommy said softly, "for helping me." "Thank you for being worth helping," Emma replied. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Tommy lifted his hand, almost touching her face, then stopped himself. "I should go tell Richard what I found." Emma watched him leave and felt the loss of his presence like a physical ache. Tommy returned to the conference room where Richard and the other executives waited. He laid out the financial analysis, showing proof of Richard's conflict of interest. The room erupted in accusations and denials, but the evidence was clear. Richard Sullivan had been willing to eliminate 100 jobs to increase his personal wealth. "I'm not just rejecting your recommendation," Tommy said calmly. "I'm formally recommending that Jonathan investigate you for ethics violations when he returns." Richard's face turned purple with rage. "You think you can do this? You think you can come in here for one day and destroy careers? I'll bury you. I'll make sure you never work anywhere again," maybe Tommy said. "But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror." He walked out, leaving Richard screaming behind him. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Word spread through the company about what Tommy had done. Lower-level employees began appearing at Jonathan's office, thanking him, sharing stories of their own encounters with corporate cruelty. Emma watched it all, seeing Tommy transform from invisible maintenance worker to something entirely different. Not a boss or a ruler, but a witness. Someone who saw and acknowledged the humanity in people others ignored. At 5 o'clock, Jonathan Westbrook returned to his office. Tommy stood up from the desk, suddenly exhausted, feeling the weight of the day crash over him. "It's yours again," he said simply. Jonathan moved to the window, looking out at the city. "What did you learn today?" Tommy thought carefully. "That power doesn't corrupt people. It reveals them. You give authority to someone cruel, and they'll use it to hurt others. You give it to someone kind, and they'll use it to protect. The question isn't whether power is good or bad. The question is who you trust with it." Jonathan turned, and Tommy saw tears in the older man's eyes. "I made this company by being ruthless. I thought that's what success required. But watching you today, I realized I've been using business as an excuse for cruelty. I've been Richard Sullivan in an expensive suit." "So what happens now?" Tommy asked. Jonathan smiled. "Now we try something different." The next morning, Jonathan called another all-staff meeting. The auditorium filled with nervous employees, expecting the hammer to fall. Tommy sat in the back in his coveralls, trying to disappear again. Emma found him and sat beside him without asking permission. Jonathan took the stage. "Yesterday was supposed to be an experiment. A test to see if leadership could look different than what we've built here. What I discovered is that it wasn't an experiment at all. It was a mirror. Tommy Hayes showed me what this company should be. And starting today, we're going to become that." He outlined sweeping changes. Richard Sullivan and 3 other executives were being investigated for ethics violations. The planned layoffs were canceled permanently. Bonuses would be restructured to reward collaboration rather than individual profits. Most importantly, Tommy Hayes was being promoted to Director of Employee Relations with full authority to continue the reforms he had started. The announcement sent shockwaves through the room. Emma turned to Tommy and saw genuine shock on his face. "Did you know about this?" he whispered. "No," she breathed, "but I'm so glad." Over the next 6 months, Westbrook Industries transformed. The changes were painful. Some executives left. Others fought every reform. But slowly, the culture shifted. Employees began trusting leadership again. Productivity increased, not through fear, but through genuine investment in the company's success. Tommy moved into a small office on the 3rd floor. Nothing fancy, but it had a window and a door that closed. He bought a new suit, though he kept his coveralls hanging in the closet as a reminder. His daughter visited for 2 weeks that summer. He showed her around the company with pride. Emma found reasons to stop by his office frequently. They would talk about projects and policies, but really they were learning each other. The attraction that had sparked during that impossible day grew into something deeper. Friendship first, built on respect and shared values. Then something more. One evening, long after everyone else had gone home, Emma knocked on Tommy's door. He looked up from his computer, surprised and pleased to see her. "I've been thinking," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "about what you said that day. About wanting to change the world your daughter inherits." "I remember," Tommy said softly. "I want to help," Emma continued. "Not just here at work, but in everything. I want to be part of what you're building." Tommy stood up slowly, understanding what she was really saying. "Emma, I'm not rich. I probably never will be. I drive a Honda held together with hope, and I live in a one-bedroom apartment. I can't offer you the life you deserve. Emma crossed the room until she stood directly in front of him. You're offering me something better. You're offering me truth. You're offering me a man who values people over profit, who keeps his word even when it costs him everything. That's worth more than any amount of money. Tommy reached up and touched her face, finally allowing himself the contact he had denied that day in the executive corridor. I've wanted this since the first time you smiled at me in the elevator. I know, Emma said. I could tell. That's what made it safe. You never demanded anything from me. You just existed alongside me. That's how I knew you were different. They kissed there in the dim office, surrounded by papers and plans for making the company better. It wasn't dramatic or performative. It was honest and careful and full of promise. 2 years later, Emma Rodriguez and Tommy Hayes were married in a small ceremony attended by friends and family. Tommy's daughter was the flower girl. Jonathan Westbrook attended, sitting in the back, watching with quiet satisfaction. He had given his company to a poor man for one day, and that day had changed everything, not because Tommy had all the answers, but because he had asked the right questions. He had looked at the world through eyes that understood suffering and chosen to respond with compassion rather than cruelty. He had proven that leadership wasn't about domination. It was about service, and somewhere along the way, he had found love with a woman who saw past the coveralls to the man underneath. A woman who valued character over status, honesty over performance, truth over comfort. They built their life together on those same principles. Not wealthy, but comfortable. Not powerful, but respected. Not perfect, but genuine. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world. The company continued to thrive, not despite the changes, but because of them. Employees who felt valued worked harder. Customers who trusted the company's ethics became loyal advocates. Profits grew alongside purpose, proving that success and humanity were never truly in conflict. Only the excuse for cruelty had ever made them seem incompatible. And every morning when Tommy Hayes walked into Westbrook Industries, he did so with his head held high, knowing he had helped build something that made the world just a little bit better. For his daughter, for Emma, for everyone who had ever been invisible. That was the real transformation. Not changing from poor to rich, but from invisible to seen. And in being seen, helping others be seen as well.